It's a pleasure to be with you here as we pry into the scriptures. We're coming not so long ago from the Feast of Tabernacles, and just this past week was the new moon, the beginning of the 8th biblical month. Meanwhile, we continue to count down every Sabbath till we get to the 7th Sabbath, which will take us to the ceremonial Pentecost. As we can see in the worship of God, there is never a moment which is not accounted for. Today, we want to look at a topic called growth versus regression. No one starts an enterprise, whether it be a project, whether it be schoolwork, without the aim of getting to the end and completing that project and getting the results or the reward of whatever we're engaging in. Likewise, we have embarked on a journey to get back to Eden, and we expect to get there. But it's to our benefit if we will take the necessary steps or take time to review our walk, our actions, what we need to do to ensure that we definitely get back to Eden. So I'm going to read from this Certificate of Fellowship letter, page 1.2, and it highlights to us the following. It says, each of us, in our material being naturally pass through 3 periods. That's infancy, adolescence, and maturity. Likewise, in our spiritual being, we pass through 3 such growing periods. 1, righteousness by grace, which is the equivalent of spiritual infancy, being born again. 2, righteousness by faith, the equivalent of which is adolescence or the teenage years. And 3, the righteousness of Christ, which in fact is our spiritual maturity. And since the infancy period of righteousness by grace is now in the past, and we have come to the time of righteousness by faith, that's the period of adolescence, in which our safety and eternal interest lie, we must not neglect to attain to full Christian maturity. That's the righteousness of Christ, if we expect to be rewarded with life, eternal, and a home in his kingdom. So just as much as you would engage in any enterprise in the world and expect to get to the end, the same goes on with our spiritual life. We pass through 3 stages of growth, and we need to get to the final stage if we expect to receive an eternal home. I'll read again from 2TG 39 3.1. It says, there's much talk among us about the righteousness by grace, the righteousness by faith, and also the righteousness of Christ. But of what profit will all this talk be to us unless we do something to find out what these really are and how to make them our own? We should therefore not fail in this, and we cannot fail if we seek the Lord wholeheartedly as we study through. So we can't fail if we wholeheartedly set our minds to finding out how we get through all these steps in our spiritual growth so that we eventually reach the righteousness of Christ and have the eternal home which we all long for. Reading from Malachi chapter 4 verse 2, we hear, but unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and ye shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. And ye shall tread down the wicked, and for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet. In the day I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts. From this, we're getting that growth is integral to our walk with God. Even in human life, failure to thrive, if uncorrected in an infant, leads to death. It's the same in the spiritual life. There's only safety if we can grow. So in other words, 5 years, 2 years down the line, we shouldn't find us in the same spiritual state we were when we first received the truth. That means at different times we need to take stock of how far we've gone in our walk with God. Are we growing in any way? Are we regressing? Are we failing to thrive spiritually? And if so, what steps can we take to remedy this? At the same time, it's good to note that growth is personal and it's different for everyone. It's not a competition to match the standards set by anyone, because God expects us, different as we are, to have reached different levels of maturity, depending on how much truth we have received, depending on different factors which are known to God. So the aim is for each and everyone to be perfect, or to be at the highest stage of growth which we can be at any given time. And how do we do that? How do we ensure that we are growing? Well, there are a number of steps we can take. And if we combine all these, playing our part and praying that God would bless all our efforts, then we're sure to grow, we're sure to thrive, and we're sure to eventually reach a state of righteousness, the righteousness of Christ. And one of the first things to do is faithfully practice what we know, even if little. Some people believe that they'll wait till a point when they fully understand everything, and then that is when they will practice what God requires of us. But the little we know, God expects us to practice it to the best of our ability, and then he blesses us with more light and more ability to continue. We see even from the parable of the talents, where he appoints a different number of talents to each and every of the servants when he's going away, that when he returns, he expects returns according to the talents which he has given. For the one who was given 1 talent, it wasn't necessary that he should come back with necessarily 10 talents of profit. But with that one, it was expected that he would have done something with it and at least come back with another one. There are so many examples in the Bible where we've seen God blessing people who were otherwise not necessarily a part of the chosen people, because they used the little bit of light which they have. We have the shepherds who were blessed with the knowledge of the birth of Christ, while all the Pharisees and the high-ranking officials were passed by. The wise men of the East as well, because they were studying, but from that little knowledge which they had, they were blessed to be able to see Christ in his infancy. We have outsiders to the commonwealth of Israel, like Ruth, who just took up the little bit which she understood of her mother-in-law and her religion, and look at the blessings which resulted from that. So let's never feel that we need to understand everything before we can serve God. The little bit which we have understood. If we have understood that surely the camp meeting has a biblical given date which God expects us to keep it on, and we do so, and that's the bit that we understand, then be sure we're blessed in that, and God can further reveal more information and give us more strength to continue to do his will. So another step which we can take to ensure that we are continuing to grow is reading, researching, revisiting the lessons which we have had. And what this does for us, it helps us to learn to stand independently. Remember, we come across this message through different people. Sometimes you hear it from the next person, and for a time that person is like your spiritual parent, in the sense that they're the one who introduces you to different aspects of the truth which may not have met before. But now, having been introduced to the truth, if we don't take it upon ourselves to revisit that little bit of truth which we have grasped, to research, to read more around it, so that we don't lean on anyone for support, then we're sure to lose even that little bit which we have. Let's look at the example of the Bereans. When Paul would bring the truth to them, what would they do? They'd go home and read about it, make sure they've understood it in their own right, make sure they're able to explain it themselves, make sure they know why they're accepting this as a truth, and because of that, they were strong in the faith. And that's not restricted to the Bereans, it's open to any one of us. If we have grasped some bit of truth, no matter how small, let's make sure we really understand it and are able to explain it and are able to explain why we are following it. And we'll find that God will make it easy for us to move to the next step and to understand more, and more gates of knowledge and understanding will unfold. And definitely from there we are growing. And not only are we growing, we're able to help others to grow by sharing that knowledge which we have gained. And our list wouldn't be complete if I didn't mention prayer, which of course is essential and integral to our growth in the Christian walk. What does prayer do? I'm reading from Prayer 95.1. Our understanding of God's word expanded. No man is safe for a day or an hour without prayer. Especially should we entreat the Lord for wisdom, to understand his word. So prayer is the time when we get to talk to God, and it doesn't bring God down to us, but as the word says, it takes us up to God. So it's a time when we get to entreat God that we might be able to understand the words which we have read. At the same time, reading again from 94.4, we find that our characters may be transformed. The change we need is a change of heart, and can only be obtained by seeking God individually for his blessing. So in prayer is the time when we individually, in our own right, seek God, and we want his blessing on what we have read, what we are seeking to understand, what we're seeking to carry out in our lives. It says here, by pleading with him for his power, by fervently praying that his grace may come upon us and that our characters may be transformed. This is the change we need today, and for the attainment of this experience, we should exercise persevering energy and manifest heartfelt earnestness. We should ask with true sincerity, what shall I do to be saved? And we should know just what steps we are taking heavenward. So this journey to Eden, the journey back to the promised land of Canaan, the journey back to heaven is not just one where we flow along and someday we wake up and we're in the kingdom, but there should be specific steps. You should know in your own right, in your own life, in my own life. I should also know what steps I'm taking next to ensure that I'm growing in the spiritual life and to ensure that really I'm on the journey to Canaan. Lest we'd be surprised one day when we expect to walk into the kingdom, discover we're on a different route altogether. So this brings us to another step, or another thing we can do, or rather which God has done for us to ensure our ongoing spiritual growth. And here I'm talking about the testimonies. What is the role of the testimonies in our growth? And Isaiah 8 verse 20, we're told that to the law and to the testimony, if whoever speaks and it's not according to these two, then there's definitely no truth. So the truth is in the law, going hand in hand with the testimony. And in Revelation 12 verse 17, we're told, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So the devil is on a war path with those who not only have the commandments, but also have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And in Revelation 19 verse 10, we're told the definition that the testimony of Jesus Christ is the spirit of prophecy. The spirit of prophecy is the word of God in any generation by his messenger of the time. That means the spirit of prophecy has always been with the people of God. Since the time of the fall, we are aware that Adam and Eve lost that opportunity of direct communion with God, and from that time, God has appointed messengers to communicate his will and his purposes to man. And Amos tells us that God will do nothing except he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets. So in every age, there is a messenger or there is someone whom God is communicating to his expectations, his will concerning his people. And that means in every age, there is the spirit of prophecy. And some messengers were given to write down whatever the messages were that God has given. And it doesn't end there. When the next messenger comes, they build on from what has been written by the past messenger and add on according to the circumstances of the time and according to God's will of the time. So we heard in Revelation 12:17 there that the devil is wroth with people who have not only the commandments, but who have that direct communication with God, who know God's immediate will through his appointed servant at any given time. There are numerous prophecies, which some have been covered in lessons before in BSM TV, which show the role of the testimonies in drawing from the word and drawing from previously written testimonies to nurture God's children into spiritual maturity. We have the one in Zechariah chapter 4, where we have the setup of the olive trees and the pipes, the tubes, and the bowl, which just depicts the drawing of the truth from the Old and New Testament, and how the message of the time transmits that truth in a way which has meaning for that time. We have Isaiah 7 as well, verse 21 and 22, where we have a man who's nourishing a young calf and 2 sheep, the Old and the New Testament, as well as the volumes of the Spirit of Prophecy, to bring forth truth which is applicable at the time to the people from those very written words. And it's not a job which anyone can do. Not everyone is the man nourishing the cow and the sheep. That's why there is a man or someone specific whom God appoints in every age to do that. Reading from 1T 2:16.1, we're told that I have been shown that the Lord is reviving the living, pointed testimony which will develop character and purify the church. Do you see the purpose or the role, the aim of the testimonies being present amongst us? It's to develop our character and also to purify the church. It's for the growth of the church, to take us from one stage to another until we have crossed through the stage of grace where we're babies in the faith. We've crossed through the adolescent stage where we're growing until we reach spiritual maturity. So the living pointed testimony in any day draws from the writings of the past members, from the word, to further interpret and align them to the current situations to benefit those willing to receive instruction. It's an all-round purification in every aspect of life. It could be some spiritual aspects, it could be some physical aspects, health-related aspects, all the relations of life. God has it covered by the living testimony. And the thing is, sometimes it's a bitter pill to swallow, but it has a healing effect, such as the same as wormwood does, you know. It's not all the things which are nice to eat which are good for us. Sometimes the bitter things are good for us as well, depending on how we take them. So at each step, it's up to us to check whether we are growing or we are regressing. If we're growing, good. And we need to be growing at the right pace as well. On the other hand, if we're regressing, then there's danger of stunted growth, there's danger of death and not actually reaching the fullness of the stature of Christ, and that would shut us out from having a home in the kingdom. So what happens when people disregard the testimonies? Because there's a lot of talk going on where people are completely disregarding the testimonies, whether the written ones or the living pointed testimony based on what is written on the Bible. There are people who are just throwing it out the window, who are disregarding it, who are even going further to state that it's false. We want to see what's the effect of disregarding the testimonies based on what we read in Revelations 12, that the devil was wroth with those who had the testimony. So we need to know the devil is at war with the testimony, to make sure we don't get it or we don't regard it. Therefore, we won't grow and reach the fullness of the stature of Christ, and that will shut us out from a home in the kingdom. So I'll read from one of the testimonies which we often read, and it's volume 5 of the testimonies, page 217.2, and it says the church has turned back from following Christ, her leader, and is steadily retreating toward Egypt. That's definitely regression. If we've turned back from the route which we have chosen to follow God in, and we're going backwards to bondage, to the bondage of sin, then that's definitely going back. It goes on to say, yet few are alarmed and astonished at their want of spiritual power. So the reason why the church has turned back and it's not even worried about the lack of spiritual power, we're going to read it here and see what actually has caused that. Doubt and even disbelief of the testimonies of the Spirit of God is leavening our churches everywhere. So there's the key issue. The church lacks spiritual power. They're not even astonished that they've turned back from Christ. They're heading backwards, straight back into the bondage of sin. And the cause is doubt and disbelief of the testimonies of the Spirit of God. And you have some people saying, I believe the Bible, I believe the Bible and the Bible only. It's only the testimonies which I don't believe. We'll see what that actually means. as we go on. Anyway, it says here, Satan would have it thus. Ministers who preach self instead of Christ would have it thus. The testimonies are unread and unappreciated. God has spoken to you. Light has been shining from his word and from the testimonies, and both have been slighted and disregarded. The result is apparent in the lack of purity and devotion and earnest faith amongst them. So it doesn't end there with disregard of the testimonies, because remember, the same Spirit which wrote, or which moved upon the writers of the Bible to write, is the same one which moved upon whoever wrote the testimonies, and it's the same one moving upon the living messenger of the day. So if you're going to disregard the living messenger or disregard previously written testimonies, then you're just disregarding the Spirit which moved upon the Bible writers. So basically, you're not really saying anything. It doesn't mean anything to say, I will believe the Bible. Only it just means you don't believe what God is saying. And furthermore, in 2:17 of the same book, point 3, it says, let each put the question to his own heart. How have we fallen into the state of spiritual feebleness and dissension? So the whole church can be on the way back to Egypt. And what's necessary is also for us individually to ask ourselves, me to check myself as well, and to ask myself, if I've fallen into a state of spiritual feebleness, how has this happened? So there's a class who have rejoiced in the truth, who received this message happily, as you and I may have done. And later on, what do? They descend to start pulling out pillars from the building. And this is a sad deception. I've come across it, a number of posts by different people. Now I read the Bible only. William Miller was false. I don't believe Ellen White anymore, that the testimonies were false. They were her own thinking. We've come across such, and maybe such thoughts even cross our own minds sometimes. But we'll find out what's the effect of disbelieving the testimonies and shaking the foundations of the faith, especially in the angels' messages, because there's a gravely important truth coming from the angels' messages there in Revelations 14. I'm reading here from Great Controversy 425.1. It says, while the investigative judgment is going forward in heaven, while the sins of penitent believers are being removed from the sanctuary, there is to be a special work of purification, of putting away of sin among God's people upon the earth. This work is more clearly presented in the messages of Revelations 14. So the special work of purification is presented in the messages of Revelations 14. And we've seen God using the messengers who proclaimed those messages, from first angel, second angel, third angel, more so the third angel, to write volumes and volumes of testimonies for our benefit. And it doesn't end with third angel, because going on with Revelations 14, there's the fourth angel and also the fifth angel. And there's more writings. And coming down all the way to the fifth angel, or to Revelations chapter 18, a living messenger, drawing from all those previous writings. So the devil knows if he can shut us away from those and pull out the pillars of the foundation of our understanding, then we won't understand the special work going on in the sanctuary, and definitely there'll be no putting away of sin. And if we remain with our sins, then there's no home for us in the kingdom. Testimonies for the church, that's CCH 93.3 up to 94.3, and I'll just pick some points of interest there. It says, in many cases, the testimonies are fully received and the sin and indulgence broken off, and the reformation at once commences in harmony with the light God has given. So for some people, no problem. They'll take the testimonies, whether they're bitter, whether they're sweet, and they break off whatever sinful indulgence which has been plaguing their lives. But in other instances, sinful indulgences are cherished, the testimonies are rejected, and many excuses which are untrue are offered to others as the reason for refusing to receive them. The true reason is not given. It is lack of moral courage, a will strengthened and controlled by the Spirit of God to renounce hurtful habits. So, in many cases, the testimonies are rejected, and they are not just rejected, like, no, I don't want the testimonies, but they are excuses which are offered. And true ones, why are we still eating flesh? The testimonies have been clear that those who will continue to eat the flesh of dead animals will walk no more with God's people, and it's not expected of those who are heading back to the kingdom. I'm worried about my health. Health professionals have said I should continue to eat the flesh. What will I eat? There's no other food to be eaten. It's not to do with salvation. It's about health. So there's so many excuses which can come up and which people give, and the true reason is not given, which is just a lack of moral courage to stand with what God has said and be controlled by God and renounce the hurtful habits. That's just an example. There's so many hurtful and sinful habits which we have and we continue to do. We tend to excuse our sinful, hurtful habits instead of receiving the testimonies and putting these habits away. What else? Remember, we said the devil is at war with these testimonies. Satan has ability to suggest doubts and to devise objections to the pointed testimony that God sends. And many think it a virtue, a mark of intelligence in them, to be unbelieving and to question and to quibble. There's another danger now, because remember, the devil is against us receiving the testimonies which will help us to grow. So what does he do? He will suggest some doubts to our minds, and then we think we're very intelligent. We can question what the testimonies are saying. Not genuine questioning for the point of understanding, so that we can do God's will. No, but just questioning to prove that we're clever and we're somewhat smart. So once we do that, we're told those who desire to doubt will have plenty of room, and God does not propose to remove all occasion of unbelief. He gives us evidence which we should carefully investigate with a humble mind and a teachable spirit and decide, and there's enough evidence for those who want to believe to do so. But he who turns from the weight of evidence, because there are a few things which he cannot make plain to his finite understanding, will be left in the cold, chilling atmosphere of unbelief and questioning doubts, and will make a shipwreck of faith. It's a cold atmosphere out there when we're assailed by doubts which we allow to take over our lives. You can't fully understand God, otherwise he ceases to be God. So it means there will be points which we don't fully understand, but God will give us enough evidence so that we're able to make right choices. And then what happens now? It is Satan's plan to weaken the faith of God's people in the testimonies. Satan knows how to make his attacks. He works upon minds to excite jealousy and dissatisfaction towards those at the head of the work. The gifts are next questioned. Then, of course, they have but little weight, and instruction given through vision is disregarded. So there you are, assailed by your doubts and questionings. The next thing, dissatisfaction, jealousy towards those at the head of the work. Then the next thing, the gifts are questioned. Is there a messenger anyway? Are there any gifts? Are there any workers for God anyway? And after that, you give little weight to the instruction. What happens next? Next follows skepticism in regard to the vital points of our faith, the pillars of our position, then doubt as to the Holy Scriptures, and then the downward march to perdition. So we see it's a downward channel. Disregard testimonies. Before too long, you're questioning even the pillars of faith. You're back down to the first, second, third angel's message, and you're already questioning them. The next thing, it doesn't end there. All the scriptures are in doubt, and then before you know it, it's down into perdition. So we should be aware of the steps backwards. When someone slides into perditions, it's really just a quick jump down, but it's a progression of steps which start from doubt and disbelief of the testimonies and failure to take instruction and reproof. But what happens then? When the testimonies which were once believed are doubted and given up, Satan knows the deceived ones will not stop at this, and he redoubles his efforts till he launches them into open rebellion, which becomes incurable and ends in destruction. By giving place to doubts and unbelief in regard to the work of God, and by cherishing feelings of distrust and cruel jealousies, they are preparing themselves for complete deception. Furthermore, it says, it is not alone those who openly reject the testimonies or who cherish doubt concerning them that are on dangerous ground. To disregard light is to reject it. If you lose confidence in the testimonies, you'll drift away from the Bible truth. So it's not only to outrightly declare that you don't believe in the testimonies, but even in your heart, if we cherish some doubt and some resistance to testimonies which come our way, then we ought to know that we are on dangerous ground. So, having heard all this, how then do we promote our growth to make sure that really we're growing, we're moving from a stage when our righteousness was by grace, we're getting into a stage of faith where we grow again, and that we're nearing a point when our righteousness can be said to be the righteousness of Christ, when we actually have on the wedding garment. One of the things is to take time to review the pillars of our faith, especially the 5 angels' messages. We saw that the special work of purification is clearly explained in Revelation 14. So if we've gotten hold of 1st, 2nd, 3rd angels' message, let's take time to really review those. What went on? What was the message? What was the situation? What was going on? How did it get from the 1st to the 2nd to the 3rd? Because understanding how these messages have linked together to bring us to the present will help us to continue and to take the next steps forward. So maybe some are even failing to step up from 3rd angel to 4th and 5th because they don't have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in the first place. They don't even believe those 3. So it's easy to just say, I'm stuck on 3 angels, I only know 3. But if you don't really understand those 3, then it becomes difficult to even understand the 4th and the 5th angel's message. So another step or another thing we can do is to understand how God leads us. God has a way of leading us, and it's been that way since the fall of man. So it's for our good to understand how God works with us and to fall in line with the plan of salvation and how it works. We have this parable in Luke 19, verse 11 and 12, where Christ is explaining how the kingdom should come about. And he says, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. And he called his 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds and said unto them, occupy till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him, saying, we will not have this man reign over us. So this just shows us that there's a man or a person to reign over us in the stead of Christ until he returns with the kingdom. It is how it is. While he's gone to the far country to get the kingdom, in the meanwhile, someone reigns over us. Someone makes us know what we need to do next. Someone explains things to us so that we're in line and continuing to grow, heading towards that righteousness of Christ. But unfortunately, oftentimes the citizens will say, nah, we won't have this man reign over us. We can watch over ourselves. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. So instead of fighting against reproof and direction, let's seek to be in line with God's revealed will, which is in the Bible, which is in the written testimonies, as well as the word through the living messenger of the day. I'll read, this is from 1SM, that's Selected Messages, Book 1, page 49 from paragraph 1 and going into paragraph 2 as well. The messenger of the day was Ellen White. Also faced the situation where when she was, before hers were the written testimonies, or when she was the living messenger of the time, still people couldn't believe her or accept her, the word which God was giving through her. So she was saying here in a letter to someone, there are some who think they are able to measure the character and to estimate the importance of the work the Lord has given me to do. Their own mind and judgment is the standard by which they would weigh the testimonies. Can you see the danger there? The danger is not really just rejecting the testimonies, but people use their own minds. And remember, our thoughts are not God's thoughts, neither are our ways God's ways. So people, instead of relying on God, will take their own thoughts, their own judgment, our own minds, and then we use them as the standard to weigh the testimonies. Do I think this is from God? Nah, I don't think it's from God. Going on, it says, my instructor said to me, tell these men that God has not committed to them the work of measuring, classifying, and defining the character of the testimonies. Those who attempt this are sure to err in their conclusions. The Lord would have men adhere to their appointed work. If they will keep the way of the Lord, they will be able to discern clearly that the work which He has appointed me to do is not a work of human devising. So our safety is in each man sticking to their appointed work. If we've been appointed a talent, let's concentrate our energy on bringing some returns on that talent. If we've been appointed 5, likewise. But once we turn to the work of measuring, classifying, and defining the character of the testimonies using our own mind and our own judgment as the standard, then we are likely to make errors. So in all this, what can we say? We'll read from Tiny Greetings 39, page 8.1, where it says, grace plus faith plus the righteousness of Christ are what earn eternal life. And from the same publication, page 7.3, we're told that, and so the unjust, the violators of God's law, have always through righteousness by grace been invited to come into the righteousness of faith, the only righteousness that actually receives the reward of Christ's righteousness and of eternal life. Grace, you note, is not the final touch of salvation. So it remains for me, for you, to make use of the time to grow from the stage of righteousness by grace, where we're babies in the faith, to a point where we're adolescents, and continue in our growth until we reach the fullness of the